Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back. Black.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. This is season 14 of Left of Black. We're here today in the Duke University Chapel Crypt, and we are joined by Thema Bryant, who is the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association. She is also a professor of psychology in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, where she directs the Culture and Trauma Research Laboratory. She's an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, and she directs the mental health ministry for the First AME Church in South Los Angeles. She is the host of the Homecoming podcast.
Welcome home. I'm Dr. Thema, a minister, licensed psychologist, and sacred artist. And this is Homecoming, a podcast to facilitate your journey home to yourself.
And of course, she is the author of Homecoming, Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. Of Dr. Bryant's Homecoming, the great legendary Susan L. Taylor writes, Dr. Thema Bryant's Homecoming is a masterwork. It is a book of wisdom and instruction, a life changer that teaches us how to unlock the fullness of our heart. The enlightening work is a lucid and spirited invitation to peace, a guide along the sacred path to the forgotten treasure of our authentic self. Homecoming takes us on an illuminating journey to clarity and calm, so needed in today's anxiety-ridden world. How are you doing, Dr. Bryant?
I'm doing wonderfully well. I'm so grateful for this invitation, love the work that you do, and excited for the conversation.
So the title of your book and your podcast is Homecoming, but this actually is a homecoming for you back to Duke University.
That's right. So I was here for my bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degree, and I love Durham and love my community that I built here at the university.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be home.
Tell us a little bit about your journey to this work, to this particular book.
Yes. So my entry into psychology is really by being a pastor's daughter. So in our community, people often talk to their faith leaders more readily than they would reach out to a mental health professional.
Right.
So in the book Homecoming, I say my first time working a crisis hotline was in my home, living in the parsonage, that people call when they're in distress. And my father did a lot of pastoral care and counseling. Yeah. And so when I found out that psychology was a field in and of itself, I said, that's for me. And I knew I wanted to be a psychologist, and then I would say, my life experiences are what led me to end up focusing on trauma psychology. Mm-hmm. So we lived primarily in Baltimore, but then after my dad was elected to be a bishop in West Africa, we moved to Liberia. The first 2 years were amazing, and then there was a civil war. Right. So we ended up being evacuated, and then of course living in Baltimore. While it's a beautiful city, unfortunately there's also a lot of community violence. And I'm also a sexual assault survivor. So all of those life experiences brought me to focus on healing trauma and looking at the ways that we can not only survive but thrive. And I would say being raised with confidence is what set me up for leadership, to not just be a critic. It's easy to sit on the side and say, this is all the things the field of psychology is doing wrong, or these are the problems, but wanting to jump in and be a part of the solution is what led me to run. So in the midst of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, I really felt it was timely for me to run for this position. Yeah.
Let's talk about this divide for a moment. We will hear, particularly in the Black community all the time, you know, folks who are in need of mental health care, professional mental health care, and their first choice will be their pastor. Mm-hmm. And so on the one hand, you have religious institutions in the Black community that aren't very comfortable with mental health professionals. And then you have mental health professionals who are a little uncomfortable when folks want to lean on their pastor and their religious experience, right, more than professionals. Talk about what that divide really looks like in the Black community and why it's been important for you as a psychologist to really go in there and try to bring that divide together. Right?
That's right.
Essentially you're making an argument that it's not either or.
That's right. So it's so important for those of us who are equipped and have the heart for it to be a bridge, so that the setup when we have this divide or debate is it leaves our communities feeling they have to choose.
Yeah.
Am I going to pray or am I going to therapy? And it's like you could pray on your way to therapy. Depending on your therapist, you can pray in therapy. And so we don't have to choose. And I'm glad that you named that a part of the divide has been driven on both sides.
Yeah.
I think often people point out the issues within the church, which they are important. And I have seen a movement where more pastors and ministers are willing to name therapy, to talk about therapy. And as someone who did a Master's of Divinity and who is ordained, I would say, while I went to a good program, we had one course on pastoral counseling, and that whole semester focused on grief. How to help people with death and dying and doing funeral, which all of that's important. We're all going to face grief, but there was no mention of bipolar disorder, no mention of schizophrenia, no mention of domestic violence. Right. And so then you're selecting people who have no training and making them the point person to help you through your issue. So I would say not only is it unfair to the membership, it's also unfair to pastors to expect them to be an expert on everything that they've never been trained for. And then the other side of it, which is unfortunate, is many mental health providers are not people of faith. And so if they are not culturally attuned, and when I say culture, not just race, but religion, spirituality,
class,
then they can pathologize. Right? So it was, I was post-graduation when I was in a clinic team meeting, and I for the first time heard someone use the term hyper-religiosity. I'm sitting there like, wait, what? And, it's all subjective. Like if you grew up
and you almost know that they're talking about Black people.
Oh, 100%. Who are these hyper-religious people? So I'm like, if you grew up with no faith community and you have a client who goes twice a week and prays 3 times a day, that's going to sound like a lot to you. Yep. Right? So, or if you have a client who fasts and you have no understanding of fasting, you may automatically assume, is this some eating disorder or is this? So it's a lack of knowledge. And so we have to operate as a team so that people don't have to choose. Like we're literally stronger together.
Yeah. You are clearly someone who has been anointed, right, as the best way to describe it. How important has it been for you personally to be willing to stand in that gap? Yes,
it has been vital because I recognize not only what's at stake, but what can be achieved. Yeah. So, for example, when I mentioned being an assault survivor, as a result of me sharing my story, at my brother's church, him pastoring, was the first time I ever saw someone do an altar call for assault survivors. I had never seen that before, and I'm sure part of what motivated it was my own experience. And people were amazed. It was women and men, children and adults and seniors. I mean, the altar was full. So we think about if we're not willing to be that bridge, if we're not willing to speak about these issues, people are in the pews or they're exiting the pews. Many people are leaving because they're wondering, when will it be relevant, right? Yeah. And so we need that.
You mentioned in passing just now that your brother's a minister, right? Your father was a minister.
And my mother.
And your mother, right? So what's it like to be in the family business?
Yes. This is the beautiful part, is that I am blessed to have people who are authentically in love with God and love people, right? Because I know some people, their experience of those in ministry is not positive. And I get that, and I leave space for that, because that's
Right. 'Cause
humanity.
some people love God and don't love people.
Exactly. So I'm like, so you should just like go somewhere and pray silently.
Right,
You should.
right.
Was that I think Cornel West? You can't lead the people if you don't love the people.
Right.
So, so it's been a blessing to like learn from them, and that whole like iron sharpens iron. Yeah.
The book is called Homecoming.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what you think home is, for folks who are engaging this work.
Yeah. So to be at home within yourself is to be able to be authentic, to be free, to know that you are whole. Even with wounds, we're still whole. And stress and trauma and oppression, they cause us to be disconnected from ourselves. And so if I'm always trying to prove myself, I'm not at home. If I feel I have to be something I'm not at home. If I'm trying to keep people at a distance, because if you know me, then you'll see
something.
Right? And so the gift of healing is to come back to ourselves. And some people experience childhood trauma, so they may say, I've never felt at home within myself. And so we can't fully be who we could be if we are not grounded in the truth of who we are. So it's a liberating work and a loving work. Some people, when I say I'm a trauma psychologist, they think like, oh, that must be so depressing. And I'm like, it's amazing to bear witness, because most of us don't look like what we've been through. Right? And so to witness people's bravery in the face of everything they have encountered, even the things that we were frightened of, it's a beautiful to be trusted with the miracle of people's hearts healing.
You're almost 200 episodes into your podcast. It was launched during the moment of the pandemic. Everyone was experiencing multiple layers of trauma. Talk about your motivation for doing the podcast and what kind of value it has been, not only for a larger public, but rewarding for you, because it is a form of public ministry.
Yes, definitely. So the beautiful part about the getting, I call it a download of inspiration, Bishop Vashti McKenzie, who's the first Black woman to be a bishop in the AME Church, and also my sorority sister. She hosts these conferences called Selah for women of faith to gather. And so at one of the Selah conferences, I believe it was one that was in Atlanta, Georgia, I was sitting like in this sea of women, and one of the workshops was happening, and I just kind of received this directive instruction to start the podcast, and for it to be called Homecoming. And I have been blown away by the reach. A part of like liberation psychology or decolonizing psychology is dissemination of knowledge, sharing information. So I can reach a certain number of people in a therapy room, but it is through our public work, social media, podcasts, books, that the word can go forward even more. And so even though it's on the World Wide Web, I had not considered it would be global. And so when I get emails from people all over the world, where there are even less often mental health professionals. So, you can look at your demographics, and I was amazed. My third top city for the podcast is Johannesburg.
Oh, wow.
Right? I'm like, what?
Wow.
So it's been a beautiful journey, not just a gift, as you're saying, to other people, but to myself. Of literally, like, I record in my bedroom on my phone. And so to just sit in that chair and talk and have it go forward, I'm like, this is amazing. And the podcast, I don't do a lot with advertising, but the podcast is what led to the book deal, that the publishers reached out to me because they came across the podcast. So it's been a beautiful journey.
How important has it been, we're in an era now, particularly amongst young folks, where they don't read as much. They get their information on their phone, usually on TikTok or something like that. How important has it been to augment the written word?
Yes.
Right? Both in terms of the book that you wrote, but literally in terms of scripture.
Yes.
By having this other platform to be able to share the word.
That's right. It's so important, and even important that the book is available in audio.
Right.
Because I will have people, I'll say members of my own family, who are not in a rush to read 200 pages, and I tell them, get the audio. So they will listen in the car, listen while they're cleaning the house, and so having, instead of like the elitism of you have to meet me over here, is what are the different ways we can bring the message. And that's a part of me as well, being involved in social media, because a lot of these psychological terms are misrepresented or overused, like the idea of like now everyone's a narcissist, and it's like that's not really how it works. But needing to be present in the conversation to share information.
You are the president of the American Psychological Association. A different kind of space. Very different perhaps from your colleagues at Pepperdine. Very different from the church you attend in South LA. How have you developed your code switching skills to be able to be present, right, in your ideas and in the full power of your thought, in these very different kinds of spaces?
Yeah, I love the question. And I actually instead have provided them a thesaurus so that I can be myself. And it's been wonderful. What I have found, I'll say it was very revealing. One of my first community gathering moments, invitations after I got elected, I was invited on Zoom to meet with a group of Indigenous women psychologists. And the first question they asked me is, how is it you're able to be yourself and still be successful? Right? Because the messages we've received are that we have to erase ourselves, right? Or dilute ourselves.
To fit in.
Right, to be acceptable. And so it was a beautiful moment. In August, we had our convention in Washington, D.C. And to see the joy people had with the transformation, as a number of graduate students came up to me afterwards and said, Dr. T, this was the blackest convention ever, and people loved it. So it was like, instead, because what I realized was, in a lot of these conferences, whether it's mental health or religious conferences, somehow what we are studying gets divorced from how we show up. So it's like we're supposed to be about healing, but people can be very robotic and just put on my pantsuit and my PowerPoint and like don't smile too much. And so we had a flash mob dancing. We had Cookie Monster show up, and you saw adults running to take a picture with Cookie Monster. We had a sacred room where people could go and meditate. And for the closing session, I was trying to work with my language, so I was meeting with the convention committee, and I said, I was wondering for the closing, could we have like a rally? They're like, a rally? Well, advocacy, that's the translation. We're committed to advocacy, where we talk about the importance of advocacy. So what I have found is people are thirsty. Like they're thirsty for real. They're thirsty for what is alive. They're thirsty actually even for culture. And so it's been beautiful seeing people experience my being my full self, not as a threat to them, but as an invitation for them to be themselves. So one of the days at the convention, we invited people to any aspect of their identity to either wear a button or an attire or something. And I had one of our colleagues who is Jewish American who said, Thema, thank you. I wore my star not only the first time to an APA convention, she said the first time since I was a child to feel safe enough in public identifying myself, right? Like, yes.
I want to sit with that for a moment, right? Because I think, we're both students of Black history, right? Black American history. What is it about the Black concept of freedom that is able, that once folks actually wrap their heads around it and embrace it, can be so freeing for other people?
Yes, yes. It is, and people get nervous with the word, but it is the radical, revolutionary, it is the audaciousness.
I like that.
Right? Because, like, we're not supposed to be how we are, given what we have lived through, right? So the depression people can anticipate, the anger, sometimes they can anticipate, but it is incomprehensible that we still have joy.
Unbridled joy.
Right. When I say I'm sure you saw it, there was a viral video with the whole voter suppression. I think it was in Philadelphia. These super long lines waiting to vote. And the Black folks in line started doing the electric slide. Right? In the midst of the suppression, they're like, we're going to stay all day until we cast our ballots, right? So I think when people experience that, it's like, well, if they can be free, right?
And realize that, they don't have to pay a price for our freedom.
Wow.
Right, it's like that. This is literally about us, right? And we're sharing the way that we work through this with you.
That's it. And I think giving people permission to celebrate theirs, because what happens is many were not raised with it, so their whole thing of, I'm not anything, I'm just American. So when you feel like you're not anything.
Or just white.
Right. So then if I embrace mine, it can highlight your sense of emptiness. And to know, even if you didn't grow up knowing about what it meant to be Italian or Jewish, or you can reclaim it. You've got some good stuff there,
You just mentioned graduate students who came up to you afterwards, and you were once one of those graduate students and young scholars at an APA sitting in the audience. Could you ever have imagined in those days being the one on stage?
So the amazing thing is, I could imagine it, but it wasn't what I wanted. So, it's that thing of, you may have the skill set for something, but not the desire.
It's not something you want to do.
Right. So I had a dream, and so we have different divisions. The women's division is Division 35. So I wanted to be the president of 35 before I was 35. So that was the dream. So at 34, I won and was their youngest president, and I was finished, 34, I did it. And so it went really well, and several people were like, you should run for president of the whole thing. And I'm like, no, thanks. And, that went on, basically for the next 10 years. Every so often people would check in, and I'm just still like, nope, not interested. And so it was in the midst of the pandemic where I got the call from a group of psychologists who said, a group of us want you to run. Will you? And this is the funny part. So you always ask for advice from people who you want to give you the answer you're looking for. You pick who you want because you think you know what they're going to tell you. So this was a last minute effort. The nominations process was about to close. And so I told them I'll think about it over the weekend, and I was going to call my father. So my father had been a bishop and knows what it takes to build a campaign. It's you don't just jump up and run, right? It's an extensive process. So I called him knowing he thinks strategically and he's going to say this is last minute. So I said, oh, you already know what's going to happen. I'm like, Daddy, these people want me to run. The thing is about to close. I haven't done any groundwork. And so he was quiet for a minute, and then he says, I feel a yes in my spirit.
That's funny.
Right? I'm like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, I feel a yes.
That's funny.
And so I called him back Monday morning, and it was yes. So we got to work and made it happen.
What's next for you?
Yeah. So many things. With the book, my next book project is matters of the heart, healing your relationship with yourself and others. Because, one of the things the Surgeon General has issued is this notion of we're in a crisis of loneliness. And so a lot of people just feeling disconnected from each other and wanting to address that. And then there's the American Psychological Association, but then there's a Global Psychology Alliance. And I'm going to be facilitating that group. And we have multiple nations, there's psychological associations. There were things this year I expected and worked for and hoped for, but then there were unexpected things. So I got to go to Kuwait for the first time for the Middle East Psychological Association Convention. I just got back from Kobe, Japan, from the Japanese Psychological Association. And so I do have a heart for global issues. And so that's a part of what's next.
Not bad for a girl from Baltimore.
Come on, be more. So why be less when you can be more?
You mentioned the Surgeon General and the loneliness piece. Does that surprise you in a moment when we all have gadgets? We actually have the ability, as you mentioned with your own podcast, to communicate with so many people around the globe, but yet with all of this technology that we have access to, we're more lonelier when we were than we were when we didn't have access.
Yes. So the American Psychological Association issued a report on social media and youth. And for some people, it's a benefit. If you live in a place where you're underrepresented, you can find community on there, and people feel that sense of belonging and connection. But for some people, it builds up this idea of like, I don't have enough likes. I'm comparing my real life to people's curated lives. So there can be a sense of there are so many people around, but yet I'm still invisible. So I'm not surprised. In addition to that, what leads me to not be surprised is this push for machinery, capitalism, productivity, and I'll say, and for African Americans, since we came here, our worth was tied to our labor, right? So we have like hustle, and you got to grind,
right? That's our favorite words.
And now people, if you have a hobby that you haven't made a stream of income, people are like, what are you doing?
You're wasting your time.
What are you doing? So that push to be busy and yet empty, so we can neglect our friendships and relationships. We can feel like we have to do PR, where like no place can you really be yourself. And so I'm not surprised. Even the script of, how are you? Fine, and you? Or if you're in church, how are you? I'm blessed and highly favored. So it's like, can I tell anybody I'm tired? Can I tell anybody I'm disappointed,
And you mentioned that in the book, right? This idea of a toxic perfectionism.
Yes.
That we don't allow ourselves the freedom to fail. To be less than.
And it, again, frees other people when we do lean into that. So as a clinical supervisor, I work with students at Pepperdine who are training to become therapists. And when I first started, what I discovered is some of the students would have this idea of me as some like magical being, right? So if they think of me as magic, then they are having to present like a censored version of themselves. And so I had to intentionally start telling stories of my failures, like to tell stories of when I missed it. And then suddenly, then they felt free enough to say, well, I was in this session and I didn't know what to do. Or the client got mad at me because I said this or did this. And now we can be real. Yeah.
We've been joined today by Professor Thema Bryant, who is a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University. She is the host of the Homecoming podcast and the author of the book Homecoming, Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you. My heart is full. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it